Welcome to the Power of Nature podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Waldo. In this show, I talk about how connecting with nature and the natural world can help us connect with our true selves and our own personal power. I share stories of how I've learned to do this as part of a regular and ongoing practice, and I talk to others about how they do the same. So join me as we go on a journey of learning about the power of nature and the impact that it can have on our own lives. Welcome back to the Power of Nature podcast. In today's episode, I want to talk about some of the experiences I've had in my life of turning to nature, going into nature at times when I've felt confused, hurt, uncertain, and unsure of my direction. So let's go ahead and dive in. I think this is an important topic to talk about, especially in light of just a lot of kind of chaos and craziness that's happening in the world. And the fact that I have found that at the times in my life when things have felt the craziest, or I've felt the most confused or lost or hurt or uncertain, that nature has been such a powerful kind of conduit of impact on my life. I'm trying to put words to just the massive amount of benefit I've gotten from nature when I've gone into nature when I felt like this. I find that turning to the natural world has always provided kind of a respite, kind of a reset, kind of a realization that no matter what is going on, things can be okay. And for me, the kind of nature that does that for me are usually being in the woods, being in the mountains in particular, but being in the woods, being kind of like among the trees, among the plants, mostly for me, where I really feel that kind of connection is when I'm in a place that feels like it's kind of more untouched by human hands, that's more, kind of wild versus a manicured place. Although when I've, been in denser places or urban environments, going to a botanical garden, going to, something like that has even been beneficial for me. But, I feel like there's one of the things I think I want to talk about in this podcast is talk to others about their experiences in nature, about how nature can be so healing. Not only has nature been healing for me in terms of going into it at times when I don't, feel good. So actually physically being in the environment of the more natural world. But also, participating in the use of more natural things. Like I've found that, eating foods that are less processed, eating something really clean, from someone's garden or from a farmer's market or, even from a grocery store, but that is not processed also just can kind of, I don't know, it just has a positive effect on my energy and my sense of well-being. And that's one of the things I'll talk about in the show is just how the natural world through and through and nature is so powerful in so many ways. Let me give you actually an example of, I want to talk a little bit about essential oils. And I'm not like an essential oils expert by any stretch. I've certainly been open to them, and I'm not like a distributor or anything like that. I have a few essential oils that I use in my kind of regimen, and then I find that I enjoy when they're used in like soaps or other products and things like that. But I don't have like, a complete, I'm not like, trying to sell you on essential oils. To me, it's more that it's the idea of a natural item coming from nature that seems to have healing qualities and an impact. So let me tell you a story. So many years ago, my family flew to Seattle I think it was on this trip for Thanksgiving, to spend it with my my husband's family. And it ended up that I was making a dish with chestnuts in it. And I'd never made a dish with chestnuts in it. I used to eat chestnuts off a chestnut tree when I was a kid. So I was like reminiscing about that and found this recipe for a stuffing with chestnuts, and it seemed really cool. Well, what ended up happening is I cut open a chestnut using a knife, and the edge of the chestnut, it's got this really sharp, outer shell, if you will, went under my fingernail, and, kind of cut me under my fingernail, in a really hard spot. And it was really painful. It sounds simple, but it was actually really painful because I couldn't kind of get to it, because it was under my fingernail, and it had just kind of wedged under there. And it got to the point where my finger was just like really in excruciating pain after a number of days. And I think it was, I washed it right away. I tried to use things under the nail, and nothing was working. And we went back home. I was living in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania at the time. And we went back home, and it got so bad that I went to my doctor. And my doctor said, well, it's infected really badly, and you should take these antibiotics. And I don't remember at the time why I was hesitant to take antibiotics. I know a lot more about antibiotics now, and the benefits and the disadvantages of antibiotics at various times. And but back then I didn't really know all that. So I got the prescription filled, but something kind of held me off. And eventually I think I did take the antibiotics, and it didn't do anything. I think that's what happened. And this is a long time ago. But what ended up happening is we were seeing a doctor for my son for a different condition. And she noticed that I wasn't using my hand. And she was a doctor that was a regular medical doctor that had kind of turned to add a lot of alternative holistic tools into her toolkit. And she said to me, here's what you need to do. Soak it in lavender essential oil and then use calendula cream. And I was like, what? And she told me again. And so I did it. I basically started soaking my finger, for 15 minutes or so, several times a day. And within a very short period of time, I started to experience relief from just the lavender essential oil. And I think I didn't use a fancy brand of essential oil. I think I just picked something up at Whole Foods. So, it wasn't like I was, dealing with the big brands that different people have different opinions about. But it really made a difference. And basically what I went on to do is I went on to, find that using lavender essential oils anytime when I have a cut or when we have any kind of open skin or anything like that is really a wonderful natural antibacterial product to use. And then I also do find calendula cream is also really helpful. And whenever I have a cut or anything like that, I often use it, and it helps, it helps me heal pretty quickly. And, I'm not on here touting essential oils or touting calendula cream, but this podcast is about talking about the power of nature. And I often find over and over and over again that including natural elements and including nature in my life has been nothing but beneficial. As a matter of fact, I talked in episode 2 about how incorporating nature into your life as kind of as a regular practice can be very beneficial. It certainly has been for me. But just like when I, was experiencing this kind of, more of a one-time, situation where I had this cut under my fingernail and it was infected badly, and my finger was really hurting, and I used lavender essential oil to help with that, and it really soothed me. It's a similar thing that whenever I find myself feeling down or feeling disconnected or unsure of what to do, that time and time and time again, I have turned to nature, often when I kind of feel like I don't know what else to do. At least that's how it started, was just like, that. Now I realize, and I engage actively. If I'm not feeling good, I engage actively in going into nature in a proactive way because I know how helpful it is. But so many times I would just kind of, out of sheer not knowing what else to do, would just find myself out, in the woods or sitting under a tree or looking at the grass or connecting with some kind of animal or something, and that it would help me. It would serve me. There are so many times in my life when I have done this. I talked, I think it was in the first episode, about how, riding horses and ponies, initially ponies, was kind of a way of starting to get out and connect to nature. And I really found that to be a way of kind of connecting to my own inner voice, my own inner self, my own inner knowing. I didn't use those words back then when I was a kid, but now I recognize that's what was happening for me. But over and over and over again, I've done this at various times in my life. So, for example, I remember, I remember when I came back from Europe before I moved to San Francisco, because I didn't know where I was going to move. I basically had a lot of plans, and it had all been kind of mapped out, and it all went, it went down the tubes, basically. Nothing worked out. And but it was this amazing thing, because I found myself kind of, as a way of trying to understand what was going on, I found myself hanging out on a beach in Greece, Corfu, Greece. And the way that happened is that, I'll just tell this story. I've talked about it on my other podcasts. I'll give the abbreviated version. So my original plan was to move from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I'd graduated college, and move to San Diego, California. I'd never been to San Diego, but it seemed warm and like a city, and I was done with the cold East Coast winters. So I was like, sounds good. I want to move there. And a friend of mine was going to move with me. And then I came up with the idea of going to Europe and backpacking, which at first was, it's just so impossible, because I had worked full time through college. I didn't have like a lot of money. Any money I had, I had to earn, and I had student loans that were going to start coming due. So, it wasn't like I could take a gap year. They didn't even have, people didn't even call it that back then, but it wasn't like that was an option. But it ended up that I kind of had a vision and a bunch of things fall into place that allowed me to, work a bunch of jobs really hard for a while and save up enough money to move with a friend to San Diego, California, but first go on a, kind of on the cheap backpacking trip to Europe, staying in youth hostels and stuff like that. And so that's what the plan was. I packed up my apartment. I packed up my belongings. I said goodbye to my family. And the idea was 6 weeks in Europe. And then I think it was 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks. I think it was 6 weeks. 6 weeks in Europe, and then back to Pennsylvania to get my stuff. And then I was going to drive to California. And I was doing this with a friend. But shortly into the trip in Europe, my friend told me that she wasn't going to be moving to California with me. She wanted to go back to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is where her family was and where she had been living, and that's where I'd met her. But because she had met a guy before we left, and I had suspected that she might not want to move because the relationship seemed to be getting serious, but she had assured me before we left that, she still wanted to go. So I had assumed that was the case. And the moment that we got on our trip in Europe, she realized that she didn't want to do that, and she wanted to go back home, and she wanted to just finish the trip to Europe and then not move to California, which completely derailed my plans, because I didn't have enough money to move across country by myself. And I'd given up my job, and I'd given up my apartment, and all my stuff was in storage, and I was kind of like in a complete pickle. So here I was feeling very lost and confused and angry and upset and not knowing what to do. And I mentioned in, I think it was episode 1, that, we were traveling around Europe, and tensions between us started to get higher because, I didn't know what I was going to do. And it ended up that one of the things we did was we went to Chamonix in France. I got to see the French Alps, and that was really, we actually got along really well there, and we had a fun time there. But that was a really amazing place to be. And for me, just being in the mountains, way away from people, hiking, and then of course, being near people in the town of Chamonix in France, which was this really darling village. I don't know what it's like now, because this was 30 years ago, 30 something years ago, something like that. So it's been a long time. Anyway, it ended up that we traveled a few other places, and one of the places we went to was, we decided we wanted some warm weather, and we left Europe and took a ferry from Italy to Greece, to Corfu, which is kind of the closest, more natural, I believe, island in Greece from what I'm told. And we stayed there, and I hung out on the beach. And there was just something so healing about listening to the ocean and the waves, and just being in the sun and just feeling nature, and writing in my journal and kind of tuning into myself. That kind of gave me a lot of clarity about what I was doing and what I was going to do. And what I ended up doing is we went back. When we were done, we went back to Italy, and then I ended up staying and living in Rome for a while, until my money ran out and I had to leave. I actually tried to get dual citizenship in Italy, because my grandfather was born there, but that didn't work out. And so eventually I did have to leave Italy, and I found myself back in my hometown, which I did not expect to be doing, and without any direction, without any sense of what I wanted to do, just having experienced my world kind of flipping upside down, not only because of my friend deciding not to move and me not being able to have the money to move to San Diego like I thought I was going to, but also just the experience of Europe was really life-changing for me. It was a whole different lifestyle that I was able to experience when I lived in Rome, the kind of Roman way of life, and really learning to, that was another thing that I really tuned into, was in Rome, people really advocated eating fresh food that was kind of in a more natural state. And so I had started doing that. I had kind of started living a more slow, savoring, I guess, savoring the moment, living in the present moment kind of lifestyle when I was in Rome. And then when I went back to Pennsylvania, where I was from, and I went back to central Pennsylvania, which is very rural, it felt like, worlds apart from where I had been. And so I was really confused. I was really, really confused about what I was going to do next. I was angry. I was upset. And, I didn't want to be living at home. I had this degree, but I couldn't really do anything with it in this small town. I had given up my job, waiting tables in Pittsburgh. I had turned down job offers in my field to stay in Pittsburgh, but I didn't have enough money to move to California. Now, eventually what did happen is I somehow was able to get a job in my field as a newspaper reporter, working for my hometown newspaper, which was an amazing experience, and really kind of unexpected, because the newspaper industry at that time was really hard to get into. So there just happened to be an opening, and I happened to get it, and things just kind of lined up. But I knew that I wasn't going to stay in central Pennsylvania forever. I knew that that I wanted to live somewhere else, and especially that I had been affected by my experiences in Europe, in particular in Rome. The lifestyle changes, the impact that I had from experiencing the mountains in the French Alps, experiencing, what it was like along the coast and nature. When I traveled to the island of Capri, and I went down the Amalfi Coast. And if you've never been there, I don't know what it's like now, but I know at the time when I was there in the 1990s, the early 1990s, it was amazingly beautiful. And all of this was affecting me. And yet here I was back in the US, back in my hometown with a degree that I didn't know what to do with. And I was lost, like literally lost and confused. And I didn't really have any friends. My friends had all gone to college and moved away. So I didn't really have any friends from high school still in my hometown. So I was really just kind of confused and uncertain. And what did I do? I turned to nature. I started going up to into the mountains, kind of between where I lived, where I grew up, in the central part of Pennsylvania, near State College, between Harrisburg and State College. And I started going up into the mountains near State College, where I had done a lot of 4-H stuff, horse and pony club stuff when I was a kid. And there was a place with a lake, or I guess it would be more of a little dam. It wasn't really a lake, but a small dam, and some creeks and woods. And I just hung out there. I just kept going up there. I wasn't hiking. I wasn't biking. I wasn't camping. I just would go there. I would just find myself just when I was confused driving there, and just driving. It was kind of a long, partially paved and then dirt road from the main highway to get back to where this dam was. And I would just enjoy driving through the woods. Really would never see anyone, being out and just sitting, often in my car, or getting out and sitting at a picnic table. No one else was there, and just being, sometimes journaling, sometimes just looking around, sometimes just crying and wondering what the heck was going on, and being really confused. And it was so helpful. It's not that there was some big set of answers that happened, like I would go out into the woods and then suddenly, boom, an answer would happen. It's not that, but it was helpful over time, because what it was is it suddenly seemed like I started to get more clear within myself about what was important to me. What did I really want? Where I might want to go, what I might want to do. It was really spending time in nature that got me clear enough to, I think the way that I got a job working for my newspaper was, I think they were doing like a special edition of the newspaper, and I offered to write a story for them. I kind of put myself out there, and that came from being in nature. It came from just going out to that dam and just sitting and getting clear. And in the getting clear, it was kind of like this little feeling like, hey, reach out to your local newspaper. And like I said, they were looking, I don't remember if it was paid or unpaid, but there was an opportunity to write an article for this like special edition. And I did that, and then I was offered a job. So it led to me having a job in my field, which was really cool. And then more clarity came by spending more time in nature, and more clarity came by spending more time in nature. Clarity like, what is it I wanted, and who was I, and what did I like? And the more I just kind of went there and sat in nature, the more I just started to kind of understand myself more. And I started to kind of tune into myself more, even though I was feeling really confused, and angry still about my life and the direction it had taken. Yes, I was working for my hometown newspaper, which was, really cool. And I'm appreciative that the editor, hired me. But it wasn't like my dream place to live. I mean, I never imagined that I would go back to my hometown and live. It seemed like a failure to me. It seemed like nothing that I had planned, or I had wanted, or I had dreamed of, and so regardless of that, it's like going into nature was like my life preserver. It was like my lifeline. And eventually what ended up happening, I think I mentioned this in one of the previous episodes, is that a friend of mine was going out to San Francisco, California, which I didn't know I'd never been to any part of California. I don't think I'd ever been further west from Pennsylvania than Ohio. Yeah, I think Ohio is as far west as I'd ever been at that point. But a friend was going to San Francisco, California, and to stay with her sister's friend and just kind of stay there for a couple of days. And there was like this cheap deal for a flight, and she's like, why don't you come along, so I was like, okay. I managed to get this like cheap flight. You could get a voucher from a local grocery store. They have this like special deal on flights, and I flew to San Francisco. And when I was there, it's a whole other story, but I knew that is where I needed to move to. And the clarity that came to me of knowing that is where I needed to move to. Because I didn't go there thinking I would move there. I just went there because I was pretty much actually depressed, confused, uncertain. And my friend's like, well, just come here with me. At least you'll have something to do and it won't cost you much money. And I was like, fine, I'll do it. Right. So then I get there, and it was this whole amazing experience where I had this complete, almost like just a full on visionary knowing at this one spot in San Francisco, where it was just a full on knowing, like of myself to myself, saying, this is where you need to move. This is where you need to move. And I was like, I don't know anyone here. I don't have a job. This is the whole way across country. I don't have someone to come with me, and I don't have enough money to get here. But nonetheless, that was kind of like the message. So I went back home, and what did I do? What did I do with this information, and what did I do with this feeling? Well, I started going back up to that dam, to that place in nature, and just sitting and writing and journaling and being and listening to the birds and, listening to the wind and feeling the sun and feeling the air and just being in nature. being in this spot in nature. And somehow the clarity came, the knowing came. And what it was this kind of plan emerged where it was very clear that I could just save up money, work my job that I was doing, which luckily I wasn't paying rent because I was with my family, living with my family, and, save up my money and move to San Francisco. And that's what I did. I moved to San Francisco, and I did not have a job lead. I did not have a place to live. I think it was like $1,200 that I had saved up, and I had an old car, and, I brought my clothes and a few things. I said goodbye to my cat. Actually, I had 2 cats. I left them with my mom and dad, which luckily they love cats. I still feel bad about that though, but I left my cats there. And I moved across the country, and I drove across the country by myself. And the process of doing that was one where I feel like nature was also this amazing, almost like, I don't know, it was amazing. The most amazing parts of that trip were, for example, like driving in a really flat part, I forget, in the middle part of the United States, where there was like looking at the clouds, because there was like this, it was so flat, there were no hills around, and there was like a storm up ahead, and seeing the storm and seeing me driving into the storm and just seeing the power of nature and just experiencing it and feeling the aliveness on this trip of that experience of driving and being really scared. I was driving by myself. I was young. I, didn't have the most reliable car. I was staying in Motel 6s that I had kind of mapped out along the way. But, this was a grand adventure. And I had many amazing experiences. Like I remember one night, I don't know if I drove through Arizona, something in kind of more like the Southwest, kind of desert, rocky kind of landscape where they have like mesas and stuff like that. It was amazing to drive through there. And at one point I remember I drove in the night, and it was dark, and I woke up the next day, and there were just these like amazing, like rust color, like desert landscape mesas all around me. That I couldn't see the night before when I'd been driving, but there they were. And it was like this amazing experience of like tuning into this nature, the power of the natural world, right? Like those things, I still remember them. It's like these experiences in nature were like, I don't know, they were like almost like a guardian of me. Like they just helped me keep going, even when I was scared, even when I was like, what am I doing? Driving across country, moving across country, leaving everybody that I know, leaving everything I know to move someplace to hope that I can get a place to live and hope that I can get a job, and, just having no idea of whether anything I was doing would ever turn out or if it would work out. I had no idea, but it was almost like nature was cheering me on with these experiences in which I just felt so alive, and I connected so much with nature and the natural world on that trip. It wasn't it wasn't sitting in not that I went to any nice motels or hotels, but it wasn't like staying in a nice place or being able to sleep. Like, that is not what I remember. What I remember is these amazing experiences where the natural world seemed to kind of accompany me, seemed to kind of support me and guide me in facing these fears and facing my doubts and continuing on even when I was terrified. I remember driving through Colorado, and just the mountains were amazing. And I had never been to Colorado before. I had never seen the mountains. I mean, the mountains that I had seen before that were similar were, the Swiss Alps. But I remember at one point, I think I did like a slightly scenic turnoff. And I was on this road with like a really steep drop down. I forget what the name of the road in Colorado. It's kind of famous for being a bit of a treacherous drive, and just being really scared because I was afraid of heights. And so being like on this road where there's a very minimal, if any, guardrail and then a complete drop down was so scary, but it was also so beautiful, so beautiful. The mountains and the trees and everything, the woods and the air and the sun, all of it. And then I continued on my journey, and I talked, I think it was in the last episode of this podcast about, when I got into California, I remember crossing the line and being like, I'm in California. And then discovering Lake Tahoe, the Sierra Nevada forest area, which, played a huge part in my life. After this period, I would return to it over and over and over again. And Lake Tahoe was just amazing. I don't think I stopped to see the lake, though. I don't think I had seen the lake. I just saw the mountains near Lake Tahoe. I drove through, and it was just, I don't know, it touched my soul. It was just amazing. These huge rocks, and these vistas and these mountains, and it was just stunning. And then I arrived finally in San Francisco, and I remember deciding that the first thing, I was actually staying kind of inland at the cheapest Motel 6 that I could find that didn't seem too sketchy. Turned out it actually was in somewhat of a sketchy area, but it's hard to assess that from 3,000 miles across the country. Back then, this was pre-internet, so, I couldn't just look something up on TripAdvisor or whatever. So I was planning to stay more inland, but I knew that when I arrived in California, in San Francisco, the first thing I wanted to do was to go to the Pacific Ocean because I had never seen it. So I drove straight out to the ocean, and through a neighborhood called out to a beach called Ocean Beach, which is, if you're familiar with San Francisco, it's near the Golden Gate Park, and it's the beach near Golden Gate Park and near the Richmond and Sunset districts of San Francisco. Those are residential districts where people live. And so I drove through there out to Ocean Beach, and it was just amazing. It was just phenomenal to go out there and see the cliffs, because that part right along the coast, if you head towards the Golden Gate Bridge, if you head kind of north on Highway 1, you go towards the Golden Gate Bridge and you just see these amazing cliffs that just kind of drop straight down into the ocean, which reminded me a lot of Europe. And it was just so stunning. It was so amazing. It was like food for my soul, seeing the ocean that day. it ended up, I stayed in that Motel 6 more inland. It was, I think, 3 weeks, 3 or 4 weeks of living in a motel, having no idea if I was going to find a place to live, find a job, find anything. I found a place to live with roommates. It was kind of crazy because the only room that was available initially was in the laundry room. There was this like small room that was a laundry room that the guy said, if you want that room, you can have it. Another person just took the other room that was available. And I was like, okay, I'll take it. And it was right on Ocean Beach. And, it was this amazing thing that I took this apartment, and I was living with several other people, other young people that of course I didn't know. And I did, I did eventually get a job. I got a contract job doing writing, but, initially, it was another struggle to find a job, to start to make friends, to navigate this new way of living, a new lifestyle, a new place to live. Even though I chose it, it was terrifying and scary and exciting and beautiful and amazing, all in the same package. And what did I do to help me navigate those uncertain times? I spent it in nature because I either did walks along the ocean, on the beach, but what I also started doing was I started running through Golden Gate Park. And Golden Gate Park, I don't know how it is now because this is a long time ago, but it was beautiful and it was quiet, and especially, on weekdays or during the days at that time. And I would just I started running. I started running through the park, and it became almost like, I don't know, it was almost like oxygen for me. It was like a meditation practice. I didn't meditate back then. I ran in Golden Gate Park, and I first started running short distances. I'd never been a runner ever. I was in, on the crew team in college for a short period of time. So I did do a little bit of running for the training for that. But that didn't last very long. And I really didn't like running in Pittsburgh, in the winter, which is when we were doing it. So I'd never really been a runner. But when I was in San Francisco, I started running, and I started running, like a mile. And then I started running many more miles. Then I started running like 10 miles. I would just go out and run 10 miles. My roommates kind of thought I was crazy, but it was running in nature. It was running and connecting with myself. It was running and tuning into myself. And this is what I'm talking about in this podcast so many times, over and over and over again. And I could go on with, story after story after story of, I started to realize that it wasn't random that I got more clarity. And then I started to feel better, or I started to have a clue of what to do with my life, or how to face my fears, or how to even know what I was feeling or get clear on things. It wasn't random that came to me in times when I was in nature. It wasn't random. I started to see the pattern. I started to see how when I went into nature, it wasn't just like good for, good exercise and good for my healing, and, or, good exercise or good for whatever. It was It was good for my soul. It was what my soul and my heart was asking me to do. And it gave me clarity, not all at once. It wasn't like, oh, go out on this walk and then boom, answer. It wasn't that. It was the ongoing going out. It was the ongoing going out and just being, learning to just be, learning to just let myself be in nature and look at the trees and look at the sun and all of that. Just being. And this is why I wanted to start this podcast. It's funny because right now, Mother Nature is actually putting on a pretty big show here in Montana. I'm sitting in my office and it's been a slightly overcast day, but the sun kind of came out. It rained earlier, but right now I am actually sitting looking out my window, looking at the mountain in front of me because I have a view of a mountain and I have trees all around me, and it is just so beautiful. But it is pouring down rain outside right now. It just started. I don't know if you can hear it or not, if my mic is picking it up, but it's like almost like a torrential downpour like we used to get in Pennsylvania or on the East Coast. We would get these kinds of rains where it would just suddenly just pour, and that's what it's doing. But here I am in my office and I'm looking out the window at the rain, but there's this mist, and I can just barely, through the fog and the mist, I can just barely make out the mountain in the distance. And to be honest, it kind of looks like some kind of Japanese painting. It's so beautiful, and it's thundering. I don't know if you can hear the thunder. Actually, I should probably check on my horses because I have my horses in the back pasture. But this is what I'm talking about. Just being in nature. Do you do this? Have you experienced this? Like right now, I'm just sitting. Today's not been a great day, to be honest, until I started recording this episode. It's been a day of frustration. It's been a day of some sadness. There's some things that I had hoped to do that didn't work out. There's some conversations that I had that just weren't what I expected. And yet, right now, I can just listen to the rain. I'm not even really technically in nature. I'm in my office. But I'm allowing myself to be kind of connected to nature, connected to this rain and the sound of the wind and the rain pounding on the ground, and looking at the raindrops and the fog and the mist, and just allowing myself to be present in this moment. Being present in the gift that nature gives us. Almost so many times I feel like it's not that things get fixed. It's not like I go into nature and then boom, 6 million answers. It's not that. It's more subtle. But the more I go into nature and the more I let myself just be kind of present in the natural world, the more things just start flowing. The more things just start seeming not as bad as they were. The more things just start feeling a little bit better. And I've experienced this time and time again in my life so much that what I find now is that when I'm not having a good day, or I'm having an experience that doesn't feel good, or that I feel sad, or I feel scared, or I feel confused, or I feel uncertain, I often forget. But then I remember, just go out in nature, or just look at something natural. Just look out the window at a tree, or just walk into some woods, or just walk into your yard, or just stand barefoot in the grass, or just feel the sun. Because what I've found is that when I do that, it helps me. And it has helped me over and over and over again in my life. And maybe it can help you as well. So that's what I wanted to share for today's episode. Until the next time. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of the Power of Nature podcast. To learn more about me and my other offerings, you can visit my website at michellewaldo.com. That's MICHELLEWALDO.com.